Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 11th of April 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We're delighted to say that today we're joined by Mark Anderson from American Free Press. And of course, Mark also runs the Truth Hound blog spot. Well, straight over to Syria, I think, Mike, as we head towards World War III.
Apparently. Well, no, before we go there, we'll just ask Mark for comment on Donald Trump's U-turn within a week. Mark, Trump's sudden Syria decision is turning Washington into opposite land. We have, that's from Yahoo, we've got Voltaire saying Donald Trump is asserting his authority over his allies. And we have you saying after US attack on Syria, Trump may have become the world ruler he swore never to be. So what are your thoughts on the U-turn? And particularly, I think, Mark, the media reaction to it, because what seems to be happening is that as Trump is towing the globalist line on Syria, he seems to be the media's best friend all of a sudden.
Yeah, some people are saying, Mike, that there's a method to the madness. I'm basically covering the different opinions that are out there right now at this very pivotal time in the ongoing war is always under. We have to keep in mind that the U.S. is always in a state of war, especially since 9/11. That being said, on my thetruthhound.com blog item that you're showing there, the U.S. is the only country that claims it has the right to just at short notice or with no notice bomb a country or launch missiles against any given nation because the U.S. supposedly sets the standard. If somebody else supposedly kills babies, gas attacks, it's up to the U.S. to bomb them. Since Donald Trump a few weeks back launched a drone strike at Syria and children died, that doesn't matter because they died at the hands of the U.S. and that's excusable. So only a world ruler or a would-be world power with a world government ruler, at least de facto, do such a thing, having the monopoly claim to use force against other countries for their moral transgressions. But when the U.S. commits those very same moral transgressions, nothing is done. Imagine if the U.S. were attacked for killing children in the drone strike. If we were standard, some other country would shell us or launch missiles at us, the U.S., for killing children in a drone strike. So since the U.S. holds this monopoly on force, this monopoly police, Donald Trump, whether he wants to admit it or not, is the very world ruler that he claimed he didn't want to be when he spoke to Congress and when he spoke to the Conservative Political Conference and when he spoke to a national labor union. 3 different times Trump said, I'm president of the United States, I'm not president of the world, but these actions belie those. The other thing, this opposition land is just the different opinions that are out there. Some are saying that Trump did this launch against Syria for the alleged gas attack, which I think we have a lot of different narratives there. He did this to basically quiet his opponents, to get the media off his back, to get the neocon Republicans off, and to get the George Soros Democrats off his back. And that it was only a couple of minutes, basically a fireworks show, possibly in a semi-abandoned airfield. And so Donald Trump did this to appease his critics, but that he's not really intent on fully going to war in the active sense against Syria. These are the other opinions that are out there. Basically, I'm just surveying the situation, but when it comes to the world ruler thing, whether Donald Trump wants to admit it or not, in his hand, whether it was given to him by the neocons or whether he took it with his own volition, either case, that's the chief point. As James Madison said, any country permanently at war cannot keep its liberties.
Absolutely.
So I was just going to respond very quickly there, Mark, and say it is this remarkable arrogance, not only of the American administration, but of course very much the British administration under Theresa May, that says that she or Trump can be on the world stage and simply tell other world leaders how they should run their countries, what their values should be, what their religious orientation should be.
It's
an immense arrogance, I think.
And it is a British arrogance as well. But let's remind ourselves what the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said a couple of days ago when Boris Johnson decided he wasn't going to visit on Monday. They said the decision to call off Boris Johnson's visit to Moscow proves yet again the questionable added value of talking to the UK, who lacks an independent position on most present-day issues or actual leverage on international affairs, remaining in the shadow of its strategic partners. Russia does not feel that it needs dialogue with London any more than London does. Well, I think that would be, if that's their true position, is a little naive, and we'll explain why that is. But any suggestion that the UK is lacking an independent position on present-day issues, or that it lacks leverage on international affairs, well, I think perhaps we could argue quite strongly that Trump's U-turn belies that statement. So, first of all, let's remind ourselves that, of course, Trump has effectively lost control of his National Security Council. What did he have originally? He had several members that have been kicked off, mostly of course, Flynn was removed because of allegations of collusion with Russia. Stephen Bannon's been kicked off, K.T. McFarland as well. And of course, where did the information about alleged Russian collusion with Flynn come from? It came from the United Kingdom, allegedly ex-MI6 and MI5 operatives pushing that in. And of course, when it comes to the actual chemical weapons attack in Syria, where was that coming from, that information coming from? Well, purely from the White Helmets. And where's the White Helmets getting its money from? Well, it got a little bit of money from US aid, admittedly, but it's mainly funded by the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. It was established by James Le Mesurier, who also, we must remember, is involved with this organisation, Mayday Rescue, another NGO operating in the Middle East, which also receives money from the UK government. So this is absolutely British influence in the Middle East. And let's not forget the broader British influence, because everywhere the Department for International Development money goes, common purpose follows. So here we've got an article highlighting common purpose active in Africa, where Priti Patel has recently been saying the Department of International Development money is going in huge quantities. Common purpose also active in India, in the other BRICS countries, want to be active just about everywhere where the Foreign Office is active. And then, of course, another hint perhaps is that Theresa May made a phone call to Donald Trump yesterday, and the spokesperson for her spokesperson said that she spoke yesterday with Trump to discuss last week's chemical weapons attacks in Syria and the US response. The president thanked the Prime Minister for her support in the wake of last week's US military action against the Assad regime. The Prime Minister and the President agreed that a window of opportunity now exists in which to persuade Russia that its alliance with Assad is no longer in its strategic interest. They agreed that the US Secretary of State Tillerson's visit to Moscow this week provides an opportunity to make progress towards a solution which will deliver a lasting political settlement. They also discussed the broader Middle East, including the threat posed by Iran. And the Prime Minister and President also stressed, according to the spokesperson, the importance of the international community, including China, putting pressure on North Korea to constrain the threat that it poses. So no sooner had that telephone conversation happened than we have this going on. So the US carrier fleet heading off to the sea south of Korea, apparently to put pressure on North Korea. Financial Times here saying that experts are divided over the effectiveness of US tactics against Pyongyang. But the key point here is, what was the timing of this? Did this happen before, or was the order given before or after Theresa May's conversation? If we put all these things together, we've got British interference in US affairs. Forget about Russian interference in a US election. We have direct British interference in Donald Trump's choice for who he has on his National Security Council. And as soon as Britain via its ex-MI6 assets, manages to get the personnel change on the Security Council. We seem to have this change in policy with regard to Syria. Is that just a coincidence?
Well, we're going to say, of course, it's not a coincidence. What we're watching is British soft power, and that power is principally coming not from Westminster, but from the City of London, the financial power base which drives the politicians. So I find it very interesting that question of Russia saying, is it worth dealing with London? I don't think the Russians are naive. I think they're well aware of what's really going on. They're making a political statement here. The British are not worth dealing with. But you could say that, of course, for them to concentrate on America gives them dialogue with the sharp end where the military might is. But I'm quite sure that behind the scenes, the Russians are watching this soft power in London like a hawk. And of course, they're well aware of the power of the non-government organisations, having thrown out several from Russia because of their subversive influence. So I think the Russians are going to be keeping a very wary eye on the power base in the City of London.
Mark, briefly, what are your thoughts on what I've just said?
Well, I would note a moment ago I was indicating that U.S. aid has long been known to be a CIA front, one of the more obvious ones. I primarily said that U.S. aid is a CIA front, and that's been well outed, well known, but not always remembered. I think it's very astute of you guys. I would just note that you've deciphered this British influence in the national security apparatus of the U.S., and I think this is something that needs to be explored more deeply, and it's great that you're bringing this out. It adds a very interesting twist on the constant allegations that the only manipulator out there is Russia on the geopolitical scale. So this is a very important point that needs to be brought forward, fleshed out.
Okay, thank you. Right, now I just want to highlight this from Norman Tebbit. Suggest people go and read this. If the confrontation over Syria escalates any further, the only winners will be ISIS. I believe that is absolutely the intention. It is intended that ISIS will be the winners here, because everything that's happening on the global stage and even domestically in the UK is based on the idea of this bogeyman in the Middle East, which is going to come and get us if we don't do the right things.
Yeah. So ISIL, as it says here, or ISIS, is going to be used as the hammer to actually break apart Syria. Once that's happened, the terrorists, the friendly and the non-friendly terrorists, will be controlled in the same way that they're controlling them in Iraq. And this is getting these specialist units in amongst those terrorist groups until you get the terrorist groups themselves at each other's throats, and then you can control them. But it's clear that the objective is regime change, breakup of the Syrian state. The next target will then be Iran. But of course, what we're really looking at is the complete restructuring of the whole of the Middle East for the benefit, it would appear, of the UK, the USA, Saudi, and we must also add Israel, I think.
Absolutely. Now, we mentioned this yesterday, but the G7 Foreign Affairs Ministerial meeting is on yesterday and today. And of course, Syria has been the main focus of their discussions. Well, Rex Tillerson met today with foreign ministers from the G7 at this meeting, and he is now heading off to Moscow, allegedly with the message being delivered from the G7. They stood for their what do they call this? A family photograph. So this is a family photograph, Brian. We can see Boris on the right-hand side there looking as if he's paying attention as usual. But the message is that Assad must step aside. Well, some people in the mainstream media suggest, with quite a soft approach to this, so they're describing it as, we hope for a Syria without Assad. Others saying that the foreign ministers have agreed that there is no peace solution for Syria with Assad still in power. So you could possibly decide for yourself which of those is more likely. Boris Johnson calling for more sanctions to be brought directly against Russia in response to the chemical weapons, the alleged chemical weapons attack. He said, "We cannot miss this moment. It is time for Putin to face the truth about the tyrant he is still propping up. He must now understand that Assad is now toxic in every sense. He's poisoning the innocent people of Syria with weapons that were banned 100 years ago, and he's poisoning the reputation of Russia. The choice is to stick like glue to the Assad regime. The choice for Russia, that is to stick like glue to the Assad regime, or to work with the rest of the world to find a political solution." And in the meantime, Jim Mattis saying that, well, this came across to me as a direct threat. Brian, the Syrian government would be ill-advised ever to use chemical weapons again. Basically, they're setting this up. If
we only need another false flag,
correct,
incident, and then
what?
Well, they can presumably trigger a massive attack on Syria, which would completely disable the country. Wouldn't actually win the war against Syria, but I think you're looking at an intent to completely decimate the country. I look at the eyes of these people, Mike, and they are utterly evil. This is to do with lies, it's fabrication, it's propaganda, and it's an attempt to get their own political agenda in place. This is utter evil at work.
Somebody in the chat box has suggested that Boris is a dangerous clown, and of course that's how he presents himself, as the clown, the buffoon, the person that you can laugh at. But I don't think he is that at all.
I don't think he's that, and also there have been certain allegations made that actually he's a particularly unpleasant individual that you would not want to cross. I think, as you say, Mike, he's actually an extremely clever but dangerous man who hides behind this veneer of scruffiness and the buffoon.
Now, Mark, this CNN report has been doing the rounds, a video clip from this, and the presenter interviewing Representative Thomas Massey, who voted against intervention in Syria in 2014, so says the caption. And what was somewhat amusing about this video clip is the reaction of the CNN presenter. And you've got to ask the question, what happened to balanced presentation and balanced reporting, Mark?
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to play the clip, but whether you do or not, Mike, this is a supreme example with a little ironic humor in it of the media's absolute refusal to give even a pretense of balance. When Thomas Massey suggests that maybe Air Force, in fighting a so-called rebel-held area, might have inadvertently hit an old storage of some weaponry that might have contained some chemical weapons, and that's what spread some chemical residue in the air, and that it was not a deliberate bombing or gassing by Assad of his own people, and merely suggests that there's another alternative. This incredulous CNN reporter has this look on her face like she's seen a ghost or something, like Ebenezer Scrooge seeing the ghost of Christmas Past. So it's just, it's emblematic, really iconic almost, of the media, particularly CNN, being absolutely divorced from any pursuit of the truth, and magnifies and accents why we can't trust the media in a way I haven't seen in quite some time. Thomas Massey being one of the few in Congress among the minority, actually uses half his brain, along with Rand Paul and Justin Amash, questioning our interventionist foreign policy, and therefore they ask logical questions, the very questions the media should be asking. And it's just really sad, but proves without a shadow of a doubt the need to replace, not just challenge, but replace the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm looking at that slide, which is off screen, because I watched that video over the weekend. Just encourage people to see it. If I just flick between these two, just look at the expression on this woman's face. It's almost like she's going to have some form of seizure, because she can't possibly believe that anybody would not believe what her news organisation is putting out and what the mainstream media. This is a heavily psychologically reframed woman who simply can't get out of the reality that she's now in.
And the other point was that, of course, she criticised him by suggesting that, well, are you really so stupid as to believe something that all your colleagues don't believe?
Yeah, if you don't believe what your colleagues believe, then clearly there's something wrong with you. It's well worth going to see it. So it's only very short, it's a few minutes long. But if you look at the lady's face, you'll see at one point it's like she's going to explode. I think the expression is cognitive dissonance, because she cannot believe that anybody could not believe what the mainstream media is pushing out. Well, we certainly don't believe what the mainstream media is pushing out. So let's have a look at what the BBC's been up to. I've been following through on the BBC's reports over the last few days. Picked up on this one: Syria war, why was Sharat Air Base bombed? Well, these are some of the comments in it. Pentagon spokesman Captain Jeff Davis said Sharat Air Base was used to store chemical weapons, and US intelligence assessed that aircraft from that airfield had dropped the bombs filled with a nerve agent, killing more than 80 people. No evidence for that in the article whatsoever. The airbase was used to store chemical weapons until 2013, when Assad agreed to their destruction. But here's the BBC reinforcing the idea that, of course, this was Assad after his forces were accused of firing rockets filled with nerve agent. Never any proof in UN documentation, US documentation, UK documentation, French documentation. Nobody ever said he did use sarin. It was always a possibility, and the better reports, of course, spoke of confusion on the ground with the terrorists. But this report went on to say in early November 2015, just after a month after launching an air campaign against Assad's opponents, the Russian military reportedly began using Sharat as a forward operating base for M24 and M35 attack helicopters. That's a really extraordinary statement, Mike, that the Russians have been in Syria for months and months. What have they been doing? Working alongside Assad's forces, but the BBC clearly thinks this is significant that they had a few helicopters there. Well, what do we say? If you look at this article, there's no investigation or analysis into the chemical attack, who did use those chemicals. The BBC simply twists the story: Assad is guilty. And they also mentioned this man. So we've got McMaster, US National Security Advisor. He says Trump is seeking a political solution for a regime change in Syria. Now, we're not saying we are the ones who are going to affect that change. Russia should ask themselves, why are we, the Russians, supporting this murderous regime that is committing mass murder of its own population? The US goals of both destroying ISIS and ousting Assad were simultaneous. So very mixed wording. I've taken some of that wording and joined it together. But if you look at what the man says, 1 minute they're talking about smashing Syria and Assad to pieces. The next minute, no, we're not going to do it. We've got to ask the Russians what they're going to do.
Right, but this is exactly the policy of Boris Johnson, because he's saying that, don't worry about Assad. It's the Russians that have got to make a decision about whose side they're going to be on now. So this is about keeping the pressure on the Russians to make a decision about whose side they're going to be on.
Whose side they're going to be on. Well, let's follow him through. He said this: measures had also been put in place to avoid hitting what were believed to be stores. There's the word, believed to be stores of sarin at Sharat, so that it would not be ignited and cause a hazard to civilians or anyone else. So they reckon that they knew exactly where the sarin was, so that when they targeted 59 cruise missiles, none of those cruise missiles was going to hit the sarin. That's a pretty confident statement, Mike, isn't it? Except the US has provided no evidence whatsoever that there is or was sarin at the air base, let alone whether it was used on the ground.
Of course, if they knew very well that there wasn't any, then they could have complete confidence they weren't going to hazard any civilians.
Indeed. So I'll give this one and then we'll come back to Mark. Obviously, the regime will maintain the certain capacity to commit mass murder with chemical weapons, we think, beyond this particular airfield. but it was aimed at this particular airfield for a reason, because we could trace the murderous attack back to that facility. So I've read what this man has said several times, and I have to say, I think he is full of, I better say nonsense, but I can think of a much better word. And I think he's in such a difficult position because everything he's saying is an utter lie. There's no facts, there's no proper analysis. Mark, are we being unkind to this rather sinister looking man?
Afraid not, guys. Donald Trump and his administration have a very act. If Donald Trump and a Christian conservative preacher and radio host that I researched about is among a number of prominent Republicans that are beginning to already back away from Trump. If Donald Trump doesn't carry through on his domestic agenda, and while at the same time he has people like McMaster saying things like this, and this whole about face in Syria, and all this ambiguity, is Trump just trying to get his opponents off his back, and this was just a symbolic launch against Syria, or is he really exercising his newfound world ruler position? Whatever the case, Donald Trump's foreign policy is going to ruin what he has brought forth, his populist message. Number one, if he doesn't get his domestic agenda done, a stronger border, rebuild the infrastructure, better economy, things like that. If Trump begins to erode in that domestic agenda because of all the demands of this newfound aggression on the geopolitical stage, Trump's glory and everything he earned in the election is going to go up in smoke a lot faster than an old weapons depot dump.
Okay.
Trump and his loose cannons like McMaster are just really ruining it for him.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for that. Well, we're going to continue through this, and the trail is going to bring us very nicely back to America, and we can give you comment again. Let's go back into this BBC article, because this particular paragraph caught my eye. Satellite imagery obtained by Stratfor in December basically showed construction work to improve the airbase. The company's analysts said the work and the presence of newly deployed helicopters, here's those helicopters again, suggested the base was gaining importance for the Syrian government and Russia as they sought to counter jihadist militants. So the BBC points us to this very interesting little company, because this company got the satellite imagery that showed remarkably that the Russians have been working to improve the airbase and were operating helicopters. This is astonishing analysis. Well, where did it come from? Well, it came from this organisation, Stratfor. Let's bring them up on screen. And we'll tell you a bit more about them. But basically, they're geopolitical analysts. This young lady caught my eye, Riva Goujon. It sounds like something you have in a restaurant with a coffee, Mike. Yeah. So I thought I'll stick with her. And, well, she's an interesting young lady. This is LinkedIn. I chose her because she's vice president of global analysis and director of analysis. She's gone there straight from university, it appears. So if we have a look at her background, Georgetown University, and then security studies at the Foreign Service School, Washington. I'm sure Mark will be able to tell us about that. And then suddenly she's working in this global analysis company. Now, admittedly, there's some sort of heavyweights behind her. There's people who are ex-American military and ex-American intelligence. But we've got this young girl fronting it. Is she there for a particular reason? I don't know. Well, what do they say about themselves? If you read the blurb, they say that basically they're there to look at geopolitical happenings and to advise big companies, individuals and governments around the world. So they claim to be very influential. And if you have a look at what they pump out, my goodness, they're hammering the Russians. They're hammering anything to do with Syria. Here's the usual lie. This is not the first time since 2013 that Syria used chemical weapons. So the blame is absolutely rammed onto Assad and the Syrians. No evidence. The US now believes Russia had advanced knowledge of the chemical weapons attack. Where's the evidence? Absolutely none. But if you read their own material, this is what they say. Stratfor is rigorously non-partisan, non-ideological. We are privately owned. We're not affiliated with any governmental or non-governmental agency. We are an objective intelligence service that provides information about what has happened, will happen, not what should happen. We make no policy prescriptions or advocacy statements apart from hammering the Russians and the Syrians over this particular issue. Mark, would you like just a brief comment, and then I'll take you through the rest of this, and we can come back, as it were, to the main discussion.
Well, just to throw in my 2 cents, I hope, okay, yeah, Stratfor is one of the somewhat lesser known think tanks, unlike Brookings Institute, unlike Atlantic Council, which are Stratfor's not so well known. It's good that we're bringing it out. And like all these think tanks, they profess to be objective and nonpartisan. They're nonpartisan in the Republican sense, but they're very partisan in terms of nationalistic versus internationalism.
Correct.
It's a different kind of partisanship. So their partisanship is internationalism. That's how they get away with that double talk.
Right. So excellent. I totally agree with your live analysis there. Let's come back to this young lady, and of course, what better place to go than a Twitter page? And what do we find here? Impressive and alarming research into an elaborate disinformation chain. Well, this was the tweet that was on her page. How the alternative right promoted the Syria hoax conspiracy theory, explained by @DFR Lab. And my attention was drawn to this pretty quickly, Mike. So here's the conspiracy, InfoWars at the top. If you look closely, well, we'll show it on the next slide. In fact, let's bring this one up. There we are. It's a bit easier to see. Excuse me. We've got InfoWars. We've got Blacklisted News. Before it's News, 21st Century Wire. Patrick Henningsen is in there. Well done, Patrick. But what is all this about? Well, if you have a look at the top, you see that this has come out of this DFR Lab, how the alternative right brought the Syria hoax to America. And also, if you look closely, it's saying that that lab is part of the Atlantic Council. When I had a look at the Atlantic Council, boy, you're in the whole thing, because you're in the midst of people talking about the creation of the European Union, the creation of NATO. This is globalist agenda on reheat, but they've been running this lab. So encourage people to have a look at Digital Forensic Research Lab themselves, get a feel for it. And what sort of stuff have they been putting out? Well, this is the article about the hoaxers. It says that President Donald Trump's decision to launch strikes about Syria in the wake of a major chemical weapons attack provoked outrage from the far-right groups who were his most aggressive supporters. As rumours of the impending strikes broke, they launched an online campaign claiming that the chemical attack had been a hoax. And what does it then say? We can track this hoax network back to Al-Masdar News, which is a Syrian promoted website. So they say the whole of this sudden explosion of people on the internet saying, whoa, we don't believe what's being shown, has come straight out of Assad. And of course, white helmets are defended greatly. In this paragraph, they say that the photographs and videos from the scene showed hideous images of dead children and footage of rescuers, including the White Helmets group, washing down victims. They don't mention, Mike, a single thing about no protective clothing. So this is the thing. There's no evidence mentioned that we had White Helmets, so-called first aiders, tending sarin victims with no protective clothing. This is just conspiracy that goes back to Assad.
Let's just make the point one more time, Brian, that while we're arguing that the video as presented was false, we are not suggesting that people were not killed.
And chemicals had certainly been used.
And we've got to remember what the White State, once again, what the White Helmets is. It is an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front, and it is funded by the British Foreign Office. And so they have not been averse to being involved in killings in the past. And the question has to be asked, the images of the dead children, where did those children come from? Who killed them? Some of the photographs that we've seen seem to show traumatic head injuries, in this, perhaps from the butt of a rifle. So what did happen here? There needs to be a full investigation, but the West doesn't want to carry out a full investigation.
Indeed. So we'll finish this clip off because it'll come straight to that point, Mike. So let's have a look at this lady from DFR Lab, Danera Barajan. This is her Twitter page. Very significant header to it because the images of Obama sort of towering over Putin. This is a deliberately demeaning image, in my opinion. But this takes the biscuit. Very proud on our latest piece on how alt-right brought Syria hoax to Trump's America. Well, I don't know why this lady is proud because there's no proper investigation in this work at all. But this is the key one here. We've got Ben Nimmo, and what he tweets out is that how to tell misinformation and fake news, my ABC test, accuracy, balance, credibility. We say there's absolutely none of any of this in this man's work. So we're going to say Ben Nimmo fails on his own journalistic standards. So we've got a very powerful non-government organisation running a group of people claiming to investigate alternative media, claiming to be balanced and unbiased, and yet they do absolutely no investigation into how it's possible that people were handling sarin victims with no protective clothing, bare skin, no respirators. I think the answer is because they know full well that the incident as presented, as Mike has just said, was not true. And this is the key point.
Just briefly, Mark.
Clearly, the establishment is nervous and they're investigating the investigators. They don't want to go into actual balance. If there was actual balance, the CNN lady talking to Congressman Massey, the item we showed earlier, to at least consider his point of view. They're really getting desperate looking at Patrick Henningsen's 21st Century Wire, looking at people that we're very familiar with. This clearly shows that they're afraid of losing the narrative. If I had to make one point, it would be that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to defence stuff then. And Brian, this is brilliant news. The rising defence budget, 2017, £36 billion, 2018, £37 billion, 2019, £38 billion, 2020, £39 billion. This is brilliant. This is going to make a huge difference.
Well, I think not, Mike, because the budget keeps going up, but the size of our armed forces keeps going down. It's quite remarkable.
So where is all this money going then?
Well, we know that some of it has gone to a fraudulent company in South Korea to pay for tankers that, of course, denied jobs to Britain, but we did give the Cornish people 300 jobs. We'll be doing much more on that in the coming days. But where is this money going, Mike? Nobody knows. What we can certainly say is we're not getting value for money, but the aim, we are sure, is to cut Britain's military because this eases the creation of an EU unified military force. And if we want more evidence of this, Fallon is boasting that defence spending is up. Here come the cuts to the Royal Marines. And what this is, of course, the British Army regiment system was destroyed to break up the morale and fabric of the British Army. That was a very significant thing. Now they're going for the Royal Marines. So we're told Russia is an immense threat. And what are we doing? We're destroying capability in the Royal Marines. We're selling off ships or giving them away at ridiculous prices, or they're being scrapped. We know the British submarine fleet is in deep trouble with maintenance and operational effectiveness. That is absolutely true. We've got no aircraft carriers. We've got no F-35s. We've got no maritime patrol aircraft. We've got no surface-to-surface missiles, and we've got no helicopter-launched missiles shortly. So the government is utterly lying. The British military capability is being destroyed, so the remnants can be simply rammed into the European unified military force.
But that can't be right, because the headline says Royal Marine to be restructured in line with a growing Royal Navy. So we're going to shrink the Royal Marines in line
you're misunderstanding,
with the
Mike. You're misunderstanding, because the Second Sea Lord, Philip Jones, has clearly said that the important thing is soft power.
Right.
So we've got to push more aid into these other countries, so we can then push in the military advisors behind them and take over their military. So our military is growing by taking over the military of other countries. We're into Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, to name but a few. And of course, the other thing that Philip Jones is very big on is cyber ships. So you don't actually have the ships, but you talk about them as if you do, because in the future you will have a cyber fleet.
Good. And in the meantime, we've got computer-generated imagery of it.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, excellent, fantastic. Okay, well, never a better time then to bring on Baroness Ainley, this human rights minister. This is fantastic. The Minister for Human Rights is welcoming the reported decrease in the number of executions around the world and reiterates the UK's opposition to the death penalty. She said it's encouraging that there was a reported decrease in the number of executions in 2016. I welcome the fact that compared with the previous year, fewer countries imposed death sentences and carried out executions. The government's opposition to the death penalty is clear. We condemn it in all circumstances, she said. We're quite happy to sell arms to Saudi Arabia, and we know that Saudi Arabia is going to drop those on lots and lots of Yemeni children. That's not a problem. Don't worry about it, but we're absolutely against the death penalty. And she said it is concerning that Iran, Iraq, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have reportedly carried out 87% of the world's executions. It's also deeply troubling that the report indicates that China continues to execute in the thousands. I urge those countries and all countries that continue to impose the death penalty to reconsider its use and to acknowledge its effectiveness as a deterrent and its inhumanity. Well, I just want to say to Baroness Ainley, aside from the hypocrisy of selling weapons to Saudi Arabia that you know are going to be dropped on the heads of children, there's the hypocrisy of state-sanctioned extrajudicial killings, which Britain is still involved in, involving drones. So this woman, aside from anything else, is simply lying when she says that the government's opposition to the death penalty is clear, that they condemn it in all circumstances, because there are clearly circumstances where they not only don't condemn it, but they use it.
Yeah, well, this is because they're complete hypocrites. We've got criminal activity by the state, Mike, and killing a few people when the British state wants it is not a problem. It's only a problem if somebody does it that the British state doesn't like, and then this is shocking and shock horror. Well, if you're feeling fired up and you want to do something to stop what is happening, we say it's vital that we get people together to talk about what's happening, to share ideas and to get people motivated. A lot of people very fearful. They don't want to put their head above the parapet. They don't want to use the telephone because somebody might be listening. We say, who cares? But what we need to do is bring people together so that we strengthen the body of opinion in the public for people who are saying we are not having this. What do we need you to do? We need more people to come to the British Constitution Group meet in Nottingham on the 22nd of April. We are there to act. We are there to talk about the reality of a criminal government now out of control in UK. And of course, it's not only people overseas who are suffering, it's also people in UK as a result. So if you haven't got a ticket, please come along.
We'll just advertise Mark's new Facebook page. Mark, we finally managed to get you onto Facebook, at least as The Truth Hound. And I believe it's facebook.com/The Truth Hound. Is that correct?
Yes, thanks for rolling that out, Mike. Just a cheap little plug here. That's an adjunct to my blog, thetruthhound.com, and doing a lot of interaction with you guys and 21 Wire and so on and so forth. So we're moving up, and I've never heard of that source. They cited that in Syria, that's supposedly the source of all these hoaxes that people like us are reporting. It's funny the Atlantic Council came up with it and these other wonks, because I've never heard of it. I'm sure you guys haven't either.
No. Okay. Well, look, Mark, we're going to end with this one then. So just briefly, because it is 1:45 already. 1 year after the Panama Papers leak, starting a shell corporation in the US may be easier than getting a library card. Sorry. So this is from Brookings. Give us the background to this.
Well, I was just mainly acknowledging this, Mike, for it's been a year already approximately since the Panama Papers. We, I believe, have rightly said that it's a ruse to follow through on the Bilderberg connected idea of a world tax, because if you can hide money in all these different places and you have all these tax scandals, then therefore we must need a worldwide taxing authority to oversee all this money laundering and all this hiding money away from the tax man. And a Congressman Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, a Democratic senator, actually had this meeting about this. And what I would really say, though, is if they really want to worry about who owns what company and shell companies and the mysteries behind corporations, they should start with the City of London. They should start with the Federal Reserve System. Who owns the Federal Reserve? These are the things that really matter. A lot more could be said. We don't have much time, but the real corporate sharks in the waters of the world, like the Fed, are being unscathed here, are not being investigated. And this tax scam is really just more of the same, more of that ruse continuing here at the 1 year mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us. I think there's been a particularly interesting trawl through political events, and particularly Syria. We'll say to our audience, thank you very much for joining us. If you're not a subscriber to UK Column, please consider subscribing. We do need your financial support to keep going, and indeed we want to expand, and we can only do that without your help and financial support. If you're wondering at the end of the news what you can do, the minimum you can do is tweet out or email out links to UK Column News so that as many other people as possible can share it. And if you are really feeling fired up, get those letters into your MPs, challenging them on any of the topics that we've raised. Do not let them get away with it. Letters, phone calls, emails that are measured, balanced, reasonable, but holding these people to account do make a difference. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.